So my fridge kept making noise on and off while I was recording this video, so that's what you hear in the background sometimes. Yay! On to the spiel. I like books. I want to say an innate joy of reading was fostered at an early age and led me down the path of a full-fledged bibliophile, but that would be a lie. Don't get me wrong, I was very much encouraged to read. My mom is a strong supporter of the activity, and she did everything she could to cultivate a similar enthusiasm in pint-sized me. And it worked to a point. I did enjoy reading, but no amount of literary hype could pull me away from the moving picture boxes found in the communal areas of the house. Despite my mother's valiant efforts, I was a TV kid. So how did I consume enough reading material to justify my current attitude toward books? The answer is simple. Being in school 8 hours a day, 5 days a week with few friends, little social skills, and no access to the boob tube, books became my main source of entertainment. If I couldn't get TV in front of my face, TV in my head was the next best thing. So I read. A lot. The more I read, the more I found stories that sparked my imagination and allowed it to bring fantastical worlds to life. And although I still watched plenty of TV when I had the chance, books provided a unique escapism from the monotonous school day. My taste for reading did not bode well with many of my fellow gremlins. I remember one particular child who went out of his way to question my preferred pastime with intense vigor and determination. His persistent irritation manifested itself as one question. Why do you read? An innocent enough inquiry at first glance, but looks can be deceiving. Any and all of my responses to said inquiry were ignored, no matter how clearly I stated my answers. And there was never any variation in his voice when he asked the question. It was always, why do you read? Every single time. Clearly, he was more interested in repeating his question as many times as he could, rather than understanding my perspective. Naturally, this led to many a frustration on my part, especially since all of my attempts to get him to go away failed miserably. Telling him to go away was futile. He just kept repeating his inquisitive mantra. Ignoring him was equally pointless, mostly because my tiny self lacked the willpower to hold fast during his previously mentioned inquisitive mantra. When I voiced my annoyance to an authority figure, at worst they didn't care, and at best they just smile and say, "He has a crush on you." But palpitations of the heart are not an excuse for such tomfoolery. So I decided to fight fire with fire. If he was going to ask a repetitive question, I was going to give him a repetitive response. So I rattled my mini-human brain for days crafting the perfect comeback, and when it was flaky and golden brown, I placed it on a shelf in the back of my mind. I went to school. The hours passed, the final bell rang, and I found myself in the gym surrounded by my fellow gremlins as I waited for my mother to transport me back to home base. I sat on the floor and pulled my current reading material out of my backpack, taking my artisanal retort off its mental shelf. The gremlin in question saw me with my nose in a book and began his routine. "Why do you read?" he asked. Then, with my perfectly crafted comeback at the forefront of my mini-human brain, I unleashed it. "Why do you not?" Pretty great, right? I used my response as often as he was willing to ask his question, which created an endless feedback loop that could only be broken by a third party informing one of us our parental unit had arrived and it was time to vacate school grounds. I'm sure that was fun to witness. Maybe. It probably wasn't. Anyway, I continued to read throughout grade school, and the habit swelled in middle school. My social life was still very much lacking, and the introduction of study hall gave me time to not only complete the majority of my assignments, but also check more books off my reading list. I also had several teachers who dedicated the last few minutes of class to letting their pupils get a head start on the homework. Or in the case of one teacher, abandoned the lesson if someone casually mentioned football, and since I care not for the sports, I just keep taking notes from the textbook while he rambled on his tangents. This made the homework a breeze, because once I had the notes, half the battle was won. I also finished the text 2 weeks early, and guess what I did with all my free time? That's right, I read. Were there students who saw me not doing any work and thought it was okay for them to do nothing? Yes. Were the students who weren't doing any of their work because they saw me reading novels in class scolded for not completing our assigned classwork while I received 0 repercussions? Yes. Did this further isolate me from my peers, shrinking my already tiny social circle and reinforcing my literary cocoon? Absolutely. But I ended the year with a final score of 110% in that class, so I can't say I feel any remorse for the situation. So a pastime I picked up out of boredom in grade school grew into a genuine love of reading in middle school, and by high school I was determined to earn the title of bibliophile. I read as much as I could over the school year, and every summer I'd make plans to read a mountain of books because Brain TV is amazing. These plans never became reality. I was lucky if my entire summer reading list could be counted on one hand, and I was always disappointed in myself for not achieving my lofty goals. In all fairness, I did tend to gravitate towards books with intricate plots and world building that, as a result of said plot and world building, are large enough to administer sufficient blunt force trauma if necessary. And that probably didn't help. But looking back on those summers, I can only recall one book I hated, and I only read it because it was required by the school district. Quality over quantity seems applicable here, so I'm gonna roll with it. My reading for fun took a nosedive in college. I had a hard enough time completing assigned reading for my courses, let alone paperbacks with no correlation to my education. Some course materials were read cover to cover with no issues, while others were only read to a point where I could write a coherent essay, and then left to wither into obscurity with no hope of ever receiving closure. A little harsh, I'll admit, but that's the way of the world. Now that I'm out of school, I've picked up reading as a pastime again, but I don't think I'll ever reach the status of bibliophile. Unless I already have, and I don't think I have due to the varying levels of imposter syndrome I've dealt with in my life. Either way, I still read massive books, so at least I got that going for me. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you liked it, share it with a friend and spread the joy. If you didn't like it, share it with a friend so you guys can hate me together, because misery loves company.